I'll admit, starting my first job at St. Augustus Hospital wasn't quite what I imagined. I'd always pictured myself at some sleek, modern hospital in the city, bright hallways, cutting-edge equipment, a bustling team of doctors and nurses all buzzing with the same intensity. But St. Augustus wasn't like that at all. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that made you hyper-aware of every sound, every flicker of light, every distant cough. And it was old. There was history here, and you could feel it in the bones of the building. The corridors stretched long and dark and somewhat creepy. Now, I am not someone who scares easily or believes in that supernatural nonsense, but this place gave me a bit of a chill. Still, a job was a job, and fresh out of med school, I wasn't about to complain. The pay was decent, and even though I was stuck with the night shift, I figured it wouldn't be so bad. Night shifts are supposed to be slower, right? Less patient load, fewer emergencies. That's what I told myself anyway. The nights were supposed to be calm, and the first 2 nights were quiet and somewhat boring, if I am being honest. It was only on my 3rd night that I learned about the rules. "Dr. Mallory, hold up." I turned to see Nurse Carla making her way down the hall, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. She was a tall woman with a no-nonsense attitude. You could tell she'd seen everything in her years at St. Augustus. The long hours, the difficult patients, the tragedies that are part of life in a hospital. But there was something else in her eyes, too. Something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, what's up?" I asked. She reached into the front pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small, crinkled piece of paper. "You haven't gotten these yet, have you?" I looked at her confused and took the note from her. It was folded and worn, like it had been handed from person to person too many times. I unfolded it and skimmed the contents. It read, "Night shift rules. 1. Check patient vitals every hour. 2. Ensure all doors to the west wing are locked by 11 p.m. 3. At exactly 3:33 a.m., if you hear 3 knocks on the door to room 103, do not answer it." I let out a chuckle. "What's this?" I asked Nurse Carla. Carla sipped her coffee, her eyes unreadable. "The night shift rules. Everyone gets them their first week." I glanced back at the note. The first 2 rules were standard protocol, but the 3rd one was completely ridiculous. "You're joking, right? Is this some kind of initiation thing?" I asked her, trying not to laugh. "No joke," she said, her voice steady. But looking back now, there was something off about the way she said it. I held the paper in front of her and asked, "What's this about 3:33 a.m. and knocking on a door? Room 103? Carla didn't answer right away. She stared at me for a long moment, and I swear I saw a flicker of something like pity in her eyes. "You'll see," she finally said with a mysterious tone. "That's not exactly comforting," I told her. "Just follow the rules, Dr. Mallory." She then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Don't try to understand them. Just do what you're told. Trust me, you don't want to find out what happens if you don't." And with that, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing softly down the dimly lit hall. I tossed the note into my locker a few hours later, shaking my head. Superstitions, hazing rituals. Whatever it was, I wasn't buying it. I was here to do a job, not play into some weird hospital folklore. The shift was dragging on, and by 2:30 a.m., the quiet had started to settle into my bones. There's something about being in a hospital in the middle of the night that messes with your head. The stillness, the way the overhead lights buzzed faintly, the distant hum of machines. It was like the whole building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I made my rounds, checking vitals, glancing over charts. Nothing out of the ordinary. Most of the patients were asleep, their breathing steady, the soft beeping of their monitors the only sound in the room. By 3:30 a.m., I found myself wandering the hall near room 103. I hadn't meant to, but somehow my feet had brought me there. The door was just like every other door in the hospital. White, slightly scuffed from years of use, a small brass number plate nailed above the frame. Nothing unusual. I leaned against the wall, stifling a yawn, and pulled out my phone. Maybe I'd scroll through social media or read a news article to pass the time. I opened Instagram, and while scrolling through some posts, and that's when I heard something. The sound was soft, deliberate, coming from down the hall. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I glanced at the time on my phone. It was 3:32 a.m. My heart started to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably a patient in one of the rooms, or maybe one of the nurses playing a prank. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was coming from behind me, from room 103. I turned slowly, staring at the door. It stood perfectly still, but the knocking continued, 3 steady taps every few seconds, as if someone was standing just on the other side, waiting for me to open it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. It had to be a joke. I wasn't about to let some stupid rule mess with my head. I approached the door, my pulse thudding in my ears. My hand hovered over the handle, hesitating for just a moment. I noticed the time on my phone. It was exactly 3:33 a.m. As soon as I gripped the handle, the knocks stopped. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. I stepped inside room 103, and the first thing I noticed was the cold. The air in the room was freezing, like someone had left a window open in the dead of winter. I noticed my breath misting in front of me. The bed in the room was neatly made. The chair in the corner was empty. Nothing out of the ordinary. I flicked the light switch, and the fluorescent lights buzzed to life, casting a harsh glow over the room. But something felt wrong. It wasn't just the cold. There was a heaviness in the air, a pressure, like the room itself was watching me. I shook my head. "Get a grip, Ethan," I told myself. "It's just an empty room and probably someone playing a prank, new doctor initiation nonsense." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I backed out of the room, pulling the door shut behind me. The hallway felt warmer, more normal. I took a deep breath and started to walk away, determined to forget about the whole thing. And that's when the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped, spinning around. The door to room 103 was closed, but it hadn't been me who closed it. I stared at the door for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no one there, no sound, nothing. The next few hours passed in a blur. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to room 103. The cold, the door, the knocking. By the time my shift ended at 7 a.m., I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I grabbed my things from my locker and headed for the exit, eager to get some sleep. As I passed Carla at the nurse's station, she gave me a knowing look. "You opened the door, didn't you?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "Yeah," but nothing happened. The room was empty. She shook her head, her expression grim. "You shouldn't have done that." "It's just an empty room," I repeated, my voice defensive. "There's nothing there." "Not yet," she said quietly. "See you later, Carla," ignoring what she just said and walking off. That evening, when I returned to the hospital for my night shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that the knocking had just been a coincidence, that the cold room was just a malfunctioning thermostat. But as the hours ticked by, I found myself glancing down the hall toward room 103 more and more frequently. By 3 a.m., I was on edge, every small noise making me jump. The hospital was too quiet, too still. I found myself wandering the hall near room 103 once again, and once again it was unintentional. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time. It was 3:32 a.m., and the time then turned to 3:33 a.m., and that's when I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound was the same as the night before, 3 deliberate, measured knocks coming from room 103. This time, I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot, listening as the knocks continued, over and over, knock, knock, knock. I glanced at the time. It was 3:33 a.m., knock, knock. I stared down the hall, my body tense, my breath shallow. I looked at the time. As soon as the time changed to 3:34 a.m., the knocking stopped. I didn't go near the door that night and walked away, continuing with my shift as normal. But normal was not how I felt. Over the next few nights, the knocking became more frequent. No matter where I was in the hospital, I could hear it, soft, deliberate taps, always in threes. It followed me through the halls, into patient rooms, even into the break room. And it wasn't just the knocking. I started to see things, shadows moving at the edge of my vision, shapes moving in the darkened corners of the hospital. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the result of just being tired. But then, the whispers started. They were faint at first, like the wind blowing through a crack in a window. But then they grew louder, more insistent, and they knew my name. I heard my name being called. Dr. Mallory. I would spin around, but there was never anyone there. By the end of my second week, I was barely holding it together. I hadn't slept more than a few hours in days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the knocking. I confronted Carla, desperate for answers. "Carla, what the hell is happening to me?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. She looked at me with pity. "You broke the rule, Dr. Mallory. Now it's just a matter of time." "A matter of time for what?" I asked, my voice rising. "What's going to happen to me?" Carla shook her head. "It's different for everyone, but once you open the door, you can't close it again." The night shift started like all the others. The hospital was quiet. I avoided room 103 at all costs, but it didn't matter anymore. The knocking followed me wherever I went. Knock, knock, knock. By 3 a.m. I was shaking. My hands trembled as I tried to write notes in a patient's chart. I just could not focus. I left the patient's room and began walking down the hall. The same hall on which room 103 was located. I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. I looked ahead, down the hall, and I saw it. A figure, tall and dark, standing just outside room 103. It was featureless, and it was waiting, watching me. I backed away, my heart racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was deafening now, echoing in my head, filling every corner of the hospital. And then, in a voice barely more than a whisper, I heard it. "Open the door, Dr. Mallory." The next morning, they found me in room 103. I don't remember how I got there or what happened after I saw the figure. All I know is that I broke the rule.